Hello everyone and welcome to Business Africa. I'm Almelga. In this episode, African investments and cooperation. Morocco intends to position itself as the go-to trade partner of its African peers. The trade war continues between the United States, China and soon Russia. Washington is reviewing its investment roadmap for the African continent. And then flooding and insecurity, Nigeria struggles to keep its promises to reduce imports by 2025. To become a major investor in Africa, and in particular in sub-Saharan Africa, one of Morocco's ambitions is to embark on major projects led by operators from the kingdom. The country plans to increase its participation in development by injecting nearly 357 million euros from Moroccan companies to African countries. And to achieve this, Morocco relies on the private sector as a development tool. The story with Ruth Lago and Ignatius Ano.
A platform to share common values between the various employers' organizations in Africa to impact the lives of people. This is the ambition of Saladin Mazoud, president of the General Confederation of Moroccan Enterprises. He says he sees an African continent that is united around the private sector.
I had a frank discussions with our brothers and sisters representing private sector organizations across all African countries so that we can move together towards the creation of a real engine. May this African private sector be and also benefit from this tremendous progress.
Speaking of Morocco's desire to integrate into ECOWAS, Saladin Mazoud said this will be a win-win partnership for the continent.
It must be understood that competition is not between countries. Competition is between regional, sub-regional areas. The stronger a region is, the more it is able to gain an attractiveness.
Mazoud also said African countries must encourage partnerships and strengthen a more dynamic private sector through small and medium-scale enterprises development.
The trade war between the US and China seems to have taken a new turn. As part of positioning duel, it has released $426 million to finance major projects on the continent. The country expects to rank as the continent's largest investor ahead of China, which had $2.4 billion in foreign direct investment in 2016. Details with Cedric Sehosolo and Claudian Sono.
The United States has unveiled a new financing policy for Africa. The Trump administration disbursed $426 million in September 2018 to finance major projects in Africa. The country, through its Overseas Private Investment Corporation, has announced major financing for American companies in the development of emerging economies. Washington will prioritize expansion, technologies, value chains, banks, and women's projects. The U.S. wants to overtake China, which is now Africa's leading trading partner, and announced at the third Africa-China Cooperation Forum it will be pumping $60 billion in investment in the economic development of African countries. Besides China, the U.S. is struggling to get Russia out of the picture as Vladimir Putin's country has made its comeback in Africa in recent years, entering into military, industrial and other cooperation agreements with some countries including Angola, Namibia and Nigeria. In a bid to outplay China and other competitors, the White House has introduced a law permitting American companies to intervene legally in financing procedures.
We discussed this more with Joseph Szlavik, a policy analyst in Washington, D.C. Hello and welcome to the program. So, now the United States intends to end what it calls blind aid, unproductive, unsuccessful and unaccountable aid to Africa. Could you explain what this means?
Well, during the speech that Ambassador Bolton gave I think the U.S. will be a little more selective in the way foreign assistance is being redistributed to the continent. They're planning to cut about 10% of the budget to Africa. So as the budget's being distributed, or dispersed, should we say, they'll be looking at how people vote at the United States in terms of the United Nations. They'll be looking at security policy. And one of the big examples will be South Sudan. They'll probably have a rather sizable reduction in their foreign assistance program because the U.S. government feels as if there is not traction and any progress. So they're sort of creating metrics to establish whether or not foreign assistance is being utilized properly.
So this policy would be built around trade. How do you think this would benefit Africa?
Well, I think what's happened now, after the summit that the Chinese had in China and the sizable amount of money that was invested in the continent, and as you've seen recently with the Central African Republic regarding Russia, the U.S. is reconfiguring its approach to Africa, seeing how U.S. funds and U.S. private sector can re-engage in the continent. I think under the Trump administration, the first 14 months, the administration wasn't so responsive towards Africa. However, as it's seen China make new commitments to the continent, the United States is realizing that if it doesn't engage now in terms of trade, that it could miss the boat.
So do you think that the U.S. can effectively maintain the AGOA initiative created in 2000 in parallel with this new policy?
I think at the moment, AGOA will be the trade policy and tax mechanism in terms of doing trade with Africa, as most treaties and trade agreements have to go through the U.S. Congress. So I think at the moment, the benchmark will be AGOA. However, as the administration lurches forward, they may be looking at a country per country basis to see how they can improve those trade agreements. Recently, as you've seen in Kenya, they've started direct flights between the United States and Nairobi. So certain countries, Kenya, Nigeria, South Africa, Angola, these countries may have, should we say, some preferences that will help spur some investment. But I do think that AGOA will be the law of the land in terms of doing trade in Africa.
Thank you, Joseph Szlavik, for your insight, a policy analyst based in Washington, D.C., in the United States.
All right, guys. Cheers. Happy Merry Christmas.
Flooding and insecurity, two problems facing Nigeria today that will make it difficult for it to reduce its food imports. The details just after the break.